The sun had not yet come up when Dale Harmon stepped into his garage that morning. He stood at the door for a moment. Not long, just long enough to feel what was missing. The space where his tractor used to be was just empty floor now. Concrete and oil stains and silence. He had done this himself. He had driven that machine to the dealer 3 days ago, handed over the keys, and signed the paperwork. So he had no right to stand there and feel anything about it. He knew that, but he stood there anyway. Dale had been farming the same land in the north for 20 years. He did not grow up there, but he became part of it. Every spring he opened the same fields with the same machine. Every fall he brought the same harvest back to the same grain bin. There was a rhythm to it that most people outside of farming would never understand, and most people inside of farming would never bother to explain. You just lived inside it. You woke up before the sun, and you worked until the light was gone, and somewhere in between you made decisions that either held or didn't. That was the whole of it. The Massey Ferguson 7724 had been part of that rhythm for 13 years. It was not a young machine by the time Dale traded it in. The paint had faded and peeled in places. The left front fender had a dent in it from a fence post in the winter of 2017 when the ground was frozen and the light was bad and Dale came around a corner too fast. He never fixed that dent. He left it because it reminded him of something. Not a mistake exactly. More of a lesson about what frozen ground does to a man who moves too quickly. The Massey had been paid off for years. Every morning it started. Every season it delivered. It knew Dale's land the way a good tool knows the hand that uses it. The soft pull of the North Field's clay corner, the way the headland needed to be taken wide on the east side, the particular slope near the drainage ditch that had to be approached with patience, or it would cost you. Dale had learned all of this with that machine, and in some way the machine had learned it too. But now the machine was on a dealer lot, and in its place, in a few days, would come a John Deere 8R 340. The neighbors already knew. The people at the grain elevator knew. The men at the coffee shop in town knew because Dale had told them. He had not been quiet about it. He had explained the horsepower figures, the GPS precision farming system, the automatic transmission, the air-suspended cab. He had said more than once that a man had to move with the times, that holding on to old equipment out of habit was not loyalty, it was stubbornness, that there came a point when you had to stop letting sentiment run your operation. Nobody argued with him, but nobody at that table had the look of a man who had just heard something true. The John Deere arrived on a Wednesday morning. It came on a flatbed, green and immense, looking like something that belonged in a magazine advertisement rather than in a working farmyard. The delivery driver climbed down, handed over the keys, walked Dale through a few operational basics, and left. Dale circled the machine 3 times before he touched it. He opened the hood. He closed it. He climbed up into the cab and looked at the display screen. There were hundreds of parameters, GPS coordinates, fuel efficiency calculations, field mapping integration. It was more information than any one person could process while also trying to drive a tractor across a field that had been rained on for 3 days straight. The first week was mostly learning. The dealer sent a technician out for half a day to walk Dale through the primary systems: GPS calibration, transmission modes, hydraulic settings, the precision ag interface. The technician was efficient and professional and clearly knew the machine well. He answered every question Dale asked. What he could not answer was the question Dale did not ask, which was whether any of this technology would actually help on land that had its own particular logic, its own drainage patterns, its own relationship with wet springs and late frosts. On the 4th day, Dale took the tractor out for real tillage work. The soil was wet but workable, or at least it had been wet enough and long enough that he had expected it to be workable by then. With the Massey, he would have felt his way through it. He would have known from the vibration in the steering column and the sound of the tires and the way the rear axle loaded up whether the ground was ready to take weight or not. With the John Deere, he looked at the screen. The screen showed him parameters. The screen showed him green. The north corner of the field had always been trouble. Every spring, it held water longer than it should have because of how the drainage had been tiled years before Dale ever bought the land, and the tile had never been quite right. Dale had learned to treat that corner carefully. Slow speed, reduce downforce, get in and get out without letting the machine sit and spin. He had done this with the Massey without thinking about it, the same way you slow down for a corner you have driven 1,000 times. The GPS field map showed that corner as clean. The system had been loaded with surface data from the previous season. It did not know about the amount of rain that had fallen since January. It did not know about the particular way this winter's frost had broken the capillary structure of that soil. It showed green, and Dale went in at normal speed, and the left rear dual sank to the axle inside of 30 seconds. He tried to power out. He tried to rock it. He tried everything a man tries when he is alone in a field with a 14-ton machine and no one watching except the crows. None of it worked. His neighbor, Ray Patterson, came over an hour later with a chain and pulled him out. Ray did not say much. He never did. But when the tractor was clear and Dale had climbed down to look at the ruts it had left, Ray looked too, and then he looked at Dale, and neither of them spoke. The first payment came in June, $4,150. It came out of the farm's operating account automatically, the way these things do. Dale had expected it. He had run the numbers before signing the deal, or he had told himself he had run the numbers. The truth was that he had looked at the projected yield figures from the dealer's sales materials and assumed they would apply to his operation. The sales materials did not know about the north corner. They did not know about the year the canola market dropped 18% in 6 weeks. They did not know about the particular kind of wet August that this part of the country produced about 1 year in 4. The wheat harvest started in July. On the first day, Dale discovered that the John Deere's hydraulic configuration was not fully compatible with his aging combine header adapter. The dealer could send the correct part in 3 days. Dale waited. 3 days of wheat standing in the field while the weather held, but the window stayed closed because the machine was not ready. His neighbor Vern Cassidy, who ran a Massey Ferguson 2 fields over, finished his wheat that week without stopping once. Vern's Massey was older than Dale's had been. It was loud, and it shook at anything above road speed, and the cab heater had been broken for 2 seasons. But Vern did not wait 3 days for a hydraulic adapter. He did not wait at all. He started and he finished, and the grain went to the bin. Dale watched from his yard on the 3rd morning. He watched Vern's combine moving through the far field in long, steady passes, and he felt something that he could not have named precisely. It was not jealousy. It was something older and quieter than jealousy. The canola harvest in August was when the real damage happened. Canola does not wait. The harvest window for canola is narrow in a way that wheat is not, because canola shatters if it is left too long, and once the seed is on the ground, it does not come back. The timing of canola harvest is not a preference or a schedule. It is a biological fact, and the weather decides whether you can act on that fact or not. The forecast said 60% chance of rain. The reality was 4 straight days of it, hard and steady. Nobody could go out. The fields were soft everywhere, not just in the north corner, but across every low area on every farm in the county. When the rain stopped on the 5th morning, the surface had dried enough to be tempting. Vern went out at 6 in the morning with his Massey. He went slowly. He chose his lines carefully. The Massey was lighter than the John Deere by nearly 4 tons at full working weight, and in soft post-rain conditions, that difference was the entire question. Dale looked at his field and then at the John Deere's display, which recommended waiting for improved ground conditions. He overrode the recommendation and went in anyway, because the canola would not wait, and he knew it. The first 100 meters were acceptable. The second 100 meters were not. He shifted his lines, moved to the east side of the field where the soil was firmer, and managed to work, but at a speed that was barely productive. By the end of that day, Vern had cut 40 acres. Dale had cut 22. The difference between those 2 numbers was not just a day's work. It was money. It was canola sitting in the field too long, losing grade and losing volume. It was the compaction left in the soft zones by a tractor that was too heavy for those conditions on that particular morning. It was the kind of damage that does not show up in one season, but shows up in three, in the way the drainage worsens and the yield maps start to show you where the problem is building underground. By September, Dale had made 3 monthly payments, $12,450. The harvest receipts had come in. They were below projection. The wheat quality had been affected by the late start and the heat that followed. The canola had losses from both the timing problem and the field damage. Total revenue for the season was running about 14% below what Dale had planned when he stood in the dealer's office the previous spring and initialed page after page of a financing agreement. He sat down at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pen and did the arithmetic the way his father had taught him, by hand, not because there was anything wrong with using a computer, but because doing it by hand forced him to look at every number instead of letting a spreadsheet make the calculation invisible. The result was the same either way. The operation was running at a loss, not a catastrophic loss, not a loss that meant the land was going to auction tomorrow, but a real loss, a sustained loss, the kind that compounds over time if nothing changes. He had known on some level before he wrote anything down. The numbers had been arranged this way for months, and he had chosen not to finish the calculation. There is a particular discipline required to finish a calculation you already know the answer to. Dale had not had that discipline. Most people don't. He called Greg Halverson at the bank. Greg had known Dale for 20 years. He had signed off on the operating credit line every spring for as long as either of them could remember. When Dale explained where the season had ended up, Greg was quiet for a moment before he spoke. He said the operating line balance would need to be reviewed. He said that if a significant portion of the line remained open at year-end, the following year's limit would be subject to revision. He said this in the language that bank managers use when they are telling you something serious without saying it directly, because saying it directly would mean saying that the arrangement that has existed between two men for 20 years is now in question. Greg was too professional to say it that way. But Dale heard it anyway. He sat in the kitchen after the call and looked at the wall. Outside the window, the fields were bare and brown in the way that fields are in November in the north, when the harvest is over and the ground is going into its long freeze, and the whole operation is suspended between what this year produced and what next year might. It was the time of year when a farmer either had peace or did not. Dale did not have peace. The annual service call for the John Deere came in October, standard first season maintenance, filter replacements, hydraulic fluid check, transmission inspection, GPS calibration update. The invoice was $2,800. Dale had serviced the Massey himself for most of its life. Not all of it, but most. The parts were available from multiple suppliers. The service could be done by any competent mechanic who had worked on that generation of engine. He had a neighbor who had learned on Massey Ferguson's and could do in an afternoon what a dealer might charge a full day's labor for. That was worth something. That was worth something that did not appear on any balance sheet until it disappeared. The John Deere required dealer servicing. The electronics required proprietary diagnostic software that only the dealership possessed. The warranty was structured in a way that made independent service a risk Dale could not afford to take. He paid the invoice. In November, a warning light came on in the cab, a small amber indicator. It appeared while Dale was pulling the tractor into storage for the season. He looked it up on his phone and found conflicting information from forum discussions. He called the dealer. They could send a technician in 2 days. The technician came, ran the diagnostic, found a sensor fault, replaced the component, and left. The service call was $480 for what amounted to a 30-minute job. Dale sat in the garage after the technician's truck had turned out of the yard. He sat in a folding chair next to the John Deere and looked at it for a long time. Not with anger, more with the feeling of a man who has made a decision that cannot be undecided and is now trying to understand exactly where the decision went wrong. The machine was not a bad machine. That was the difficult thing about it. It was technically superior in almost every measurable category to what it had replaced. It had more power, more precision, more capability, more data, The problem was not the machine. The problem was the relationship between the machine and the operation, between the capability of the technology and the scale of the farm that was supposed to pay for it. A 380-acre mixed grain operation in the north was not the context this machine had been designed to optimize. It had been designed for larger operations, for farms with dedicated precision ag staff and high-volume outputs that could absorb the cost structure. Dale's farm was not that. Dale's farm had been exactly what it needed to be, and he had tried to make it something else. In December, the bank called again, not Greg this time, a different voice. More formal, they scheduled a meeting. Dale drove to the bank and sat across from Greg and a woman from the credit department he had never met. The papers on the table showed the full picture. The operating line balance carried forward, the monthly equipment payment, the total increase in fixed costs year over year, the revenue shortfall. Greg explained the situation the way he had explained it on the phone, but more completely this time, with the numbers in front of them. The operating line as it stood could not be renewed at the same level for the coming season. Either the fixed cost structure changed meaningfully, or additional collateral would be required. Dale asked what meaningfully meant. Greg said there was really only one fixed cost that could move the number enough to matter. They both knew what it was without naming it. Dale drove home. He did not make any calls that day. He put wood in the stove and sat by it until the fire burned down, and he let it burn down without adding more. He called Vern Cassidy the next morning. Vern said, "Come over for coffee." Dale went. They sat in Vern's kitchen, and Vern did not ask a single question about what was happening, because in this part of the country, men like Vern do not ask questions they already know the answer to. He just told Dale there was a used Massey Ferguson 7726 on a dealer lot 2 towns over. Previous owner had retired, 210 hours, clean machine, listed at $49,000, but there was room in the number. Dale thanked him. Vern refilled his coffee. Neither of them said anything for a while. In January, Dale went back to the dealer. Harlan Briggs was the floor manager there, and he sat down across from Dale and pulled up the numbers on the John Deere. Current resale value on a machine that age with 1 season of use came back at $184,000. The original financed amount after trade-in had been $228,000. After payments and depreciation, the remaining liability was approximately $50,000. Dale looked at the number. Then he looked at Harlan. Harlan did not look away. He had had this conversation before with other customers, and he was not proud of having it, but he was not going to pretend the number was something different than what it was. They talked through the options. A straight sale with the balance rolled into an unsecured note was one path. A trade into a different machine with the gap structured into a new agreement was another. The used Massey 7726 that Vern had mentioned was sitting on this same dealer's lot because it was a small market and the machines all ended up at the same places eventually. Harlan showed Dale the inspection sheet on it. 212 hours. Previous owner had serviced it on schedule. The hydraulics were clean. The cab was functional. The engine was the same generation as the one Dale had spent 13 years learning on the 7724, modified and updated but recognizably the same family of machine. Dale asked to start it. They went out to the lot. The Massey started on the first attempt in the January cold. Dale sat in the cab and felt the vibration through the seat and listened to the engine at idle. He did not look at any screens because there were no screens that needed looking at. There was a basic display. There was a steering wheel. There were controls arranged the way Massey had always arranged them, in the order that made sense to a man who intended to use the machine rather than manage it. He took it around the parking lot once. He could feel the ground through the tires. He could feel the weight distribution. He could feel that the front axle was loaded correctly and the rear was settled, and the whole machine was speaking to him in the language he already knew. He signed the paperwork that afternoon. The debt structure that resulted was not comfortable. The $50,000 gap from the John Deere transaction was absorbed into the operating line. The Massey was financed at $44,000 for 3 years, at a payment that was, per month, a fraction of what the John Deere had cost. The total liability was real, and it would take time to work down. There was no escaping the fact that the year had cost him something. It did not have to cost him. But there was no monthly fixed payment that would stop the farm from functioning if one season came in light. There was no proprietary service requirement that meant a warning light became a 2-day wait and a $500 bill. There was no GPS field map that would tell him the north corner was safe to enter at speed when he already knew from 20 years of walking that ground that it was not. When March came and the ground started to open, Dale pulled the Massey out of the shed at 6 in the morning. The temperature was still below freezing. The engine caught on the first turn. He let it warm up for 10 minutes, watching the gauges settle, listening to the idle smooth out. Then he put it in gear and drove to the field. The north corner was still soft when he got there. He slowed down before he reached it. Not because a screen told him to, because he knew. He moved through it carefully, the way he had always moved through it, with the throttle low and the weight balanced and his attention on what he could feel through the seat and the steering and the way the rear tires were gripping. He got through without incident, the way he had gotten through 100 times before with a machine he understood and trusted. Ray Patterson waved from the road as Dale made his first pass back along the headland. Dale waved back. Vern Cassidy was working the field across the road. He did not wave. Vern rarely waved, but he watched, in the way that a man watches something when he already knows the outcome and does not need to be surprised. The story of what Dale Harmon lost in that year and a half is easy to tell in numbers. 1 season of reduced yield, 1 year of elevated fixed costs, approximately $94,000 in restructured debt, a farm credit relationship that had been uncomplicated for 20 years and was now watched more carefully by the man at the bank who used to sign off without a second conversation. But the number version of the story is not really the story. The story is about something harder to put a value on. It is about what happens when a man decides that the thing he has built and maintained and learned over many years is not enough. When the pressure of appearances, of wanting to be seen as someone who is kept up, of hearing the wrong comment at the wrong table and taking it too seriously, causes him to trade away something that was working for something that looked better from the road. The John Deere was not wrong for every farmer. On the right operation, with the right scale and the right infrastructure and the right financial cushion, it was exactly what it claimed to be. The technology was real, the capability was real, the gains were achievable. Just not here. Just not on this land, with this debt load, at this point in this man's farming life. Massey Ferguson does not promise you anything flashy. It does not put its name on promises about yield percentages or fuel savings or satellite-guided perfection. What it offers is something older and less marketable, a machine that a man can understand, a machine that can be repaired by someone who knows engines rather than someone who knows software licenses. A machine that speaks a language close enough to the ground that the man operating it can still hear what the ground is saying. There are parts of farming that technology will improve. There are efficiencies to be gained and yields to be optimized and labor to be reduced. None of that is false, but the foundation under all of it is still soil and weather and debt and time. And when those 4 things are arranged against you in the same season, what matters is not which machine has the most features. What matters is which machine you can afford to keep running, and which machine will start in the cold, and which machine will let you get your harvest in the bin before the next rain comes. Dale Harmon learned that the expensive way. Most lessons of any real value are learned that way. He came out the other side with a machine he could work with, and a debt he could manage, and a north corner that he would navigate for the rest of his farming life, the same way he always had, slowly and carefully, with both hands on the wheel and his attention on the ground beneath him. The Massey Ferguson sat in the yard in the long April light and did not ask to be admired. It just waited for the next morning, the way a good machine does.